All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone. It's a usual Tuesday, but I am all off of my schedule because I've been off. It was the holiday weekend, all sorts of stuff. So, but I am more energetic than usual, which that's a pretty high bar. But anyway, so today we are talking about one of my favorite topics, although I have a lot of favorites, but we're talking about digital adoption and digital transformation. This is going to be a fun one. But I am joined by Luke. It's Talbot, but I know that's not the way your family pronounces it. As soon as I said it, I'm like, man, I made a note. Which one? How is it that your family pronounces your last name again?
That's a really funny thing. So, like literally before this,
Talbot.
Talbot.
Was it Talbot?
Talbot. It's all cool though, because most people say Talbot, right? So it's fine.
I know. Well, it's because it's the A, but it's all right. Talbot. See, all right. Well, here I thought I had it because I remembered to ask, and then I totally flubbed it. But anyway, so he's from Userlane, and we're gonna get into this one and not just talk about necessarily what digital adoption is, which we will, because I still feel like this is a conversation that is not happening among L&D circles enough. But we're going to get into kind of this whole, what do we do about it? How do we actually take action on it? And what really are we doing to measure this? Because again, there's a lot of finger pointing is system adoption or digital transformation? Is that HR? Is it L&D? Or is it IT? And the answer is yes. It's just yes. All of the above. So I'm excited. I'm excited to have this conversation. But while we're getting started here, for those of you who are joining live, let me know where you're joining from. But Luke, where are you located right now?
So on a map right now, I'm located in Winchester in England. So not
Okay.
Winchester in the US. So there's probably different ones.
Are
right?
you still in the heat wave thing? Is that still knocking you guys out?
Absolutely not. No, it's we're back to good old fashioned English weather, which is famous, world famous. It's something we can't export, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Now, but were you experiencing that whole thing? Because I remember I talked to a bunch of people over there and they were like, this is bad. Like we aren't designed for this. It was brutal there for a window.
Yeah. It was hot. I actually I'm pretty lucky though, because I managed to benefit from this work anywhere policy that Userlane has, that increasingly companies have now. So basically you can work from anywhere. So we escaped the heat of England and went to Spain for a bit, where it was a bit cooler, thankfully. So I mean, we were in the north of Spain. The south of Spain was like an oven, but in the part we were in, it was cooler. So.
I like it. So you know what? I know quite a few people that have done the same thing to kind of escape different temperatures. We have that up in the Midwest all the time. People, they leave the Midwest in the winter for good reasons. It's not nice in the winter up here, believe it or not, with sub-zero temperatures and mounds of snow and all that stuff. So believe it or not, they go south to try and escape it. So I can relate to that.
It presents an image though, right? When you tell people that, oh yeah, we summer in Spain and we winter in the Alps, that you don't want to say that. That's like waffle. You don't want to talk about that.
I know. You know what? I get the same response from people if I correct them when they call me Chris. If I go, oh no, actually it's Christopher. It's the exact same response as like, oh, I summer somewhere else. People have this like, oh wow, you're one of those. And you're like, no, I'm not, but okay.
Yeah. And I'm a pretty down to earth normal guy, right? But I live in Winchester in Hampshire in England, and people automatically assume I'm in a little castle with a butler outside. So
well, you do have a cool setup. I gotta say, the background and setup, you have a way cooler background than I do. I just have Fred, my friendly fake house plant, and my map on the other side, and that's it. It's pretty plain.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's transition a little bit about you and kind of your background in this space, because you're the head of product for Userlane, correct? Is that your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chief Product Officer at Userlane, been here a couple of years now, coming up to exactly a couple of years. So I was one of those people who did, I guess over in the US, you call it the big quit, and the great resignation. So
the great resignation. All right.
Exactly.
You were doing something else and you said enough of this.
Hopped over to Userlane at the end of 2020, which is, terrible times for everybody, but it opened up a lot of opportunities.
Okay.
But yeah, so
now, background wise, was this like, were you like always, did you always have this childhood dream of leading product for a software adoption technology?
No, naturally. Yeah, when the careers advisor took me to one side when I was like 14 years old and they said, what do you want to be doing? I said, I want to work in product management. That's
I want to
exactly
lead
where
product development, but
yeah.
specifically, if there's a technology that helps with digital adoption, that's really the
Exactly.
path. And they
Well,
said, we know exactly what.
if I had explained that to the careers officer back in the mid 90s or early 90s, they wouldn't have known what I was talking about, right? And neither
No,
would
they
I.
wouldn't
So
have.
nothing
No, that's
that
true.
I'm doing right now probably existed. But yeah, no. So it's not what I've always wanted to be doing because it's not always existed. But increasingly, as my career's gone by, when I first started out, you know, we were living the dream, right? We were grabbing a CD, taking it to people's offices, putting it into a server, installing it, and then running through an intensive week-long or 2-week-long training program and giving people certificates saying, well done, you know how to use the dashboards, and well done, you know how to configure a contact center, those sorts of things. And yeah, so naturally,
I posted about that yesterday because that was kind of like my start too. It was, you went in, you installed this big healthcare system, and then you sat with them for like 2 weeks, and you're like, all right, you've been trained.
And then you get this thing where you've given them everything they're going to need to know in their user journey, right? You've given it to them in some concentrated, hey, this is basics 101. Then you've got the admin course, and then you've got your expert course. You condensed it down into 2 weeks and gave them everything that they might need to know over the next 12 months.
Yeah. You might not need this for another 2 years, but
and then what happens?
I'm going to tell you now, and you better remember it.
And then they call up and they say, I don't remember how to do this. Well, we did cover that on day 3, but you won't remember. It's fine because that was 6 months ago. So I think it's naturally things have started moving more towards in the flow of learning, right? So in the flow of work. So you need things to be presented to you when you need them, not 6 months ago when you have no clue what the context is and you don't really understand what the problem is either. So yeah.
So were you always in the software space, just in a different capacity of that?
No, absolutely not. So I was so I have a very colorful past in that my education. When I was starting out, I wanted to be an archaeologist, Christopher. So
really?
I was going to be Indiana Jones, and then I realized that obviously 1, the role is taken, 2, it doesn't pay very well, and 3, I'm not patient enough. So basically, I'm very passionate.
That's the part that I don't think. My dad wanted to be an archaeologist, and I remember he said, I thought it until I went into my first few semesters of it, and I was like, how much time am I going to sit here just sifting through dirt? I can't do this.
And that's the fun part, by the way.
That's the fun part. Yeah. That's the super exciting part.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, my wife, I took her on a first date back in 1999, and the first date was to a room I was working in where I was basically classifying 500-year-old skeletons and working out, how they died and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, that's where I started out. Okay. Very quickly pivoted into basically working with computers, so databases and database design, and then into 3D graphics, video game design, those sorts of things. And then came the transition into software, basically about 2000, 2001. Okay. So yeah,
I can see the connection because some of it, archaeology, you're trying to get to the bottom, solve complex problems, and put pieces together. And I guess digital adoption is helping solve the complexity of software. I mean, you could make some parallels. Well, I suppose.
Interestingly, and this is maybe we get onto it later, what is the future for digital adoption, right? And you start talking about where the technology is evolving. This thing could come full circle, because if you think about the kind of technology we do in digital adoption, we can get into it in a bit more detail. We help people with contextual guides and hints on pages in applications to help them understand how to do something while they're doing it. And now we're starting to see that move into the real world. You've got this mixed reality, mixed mode, augmented reality with people wearing headsets, literally performing engineering tasks with guides and hints in front of them. And the funny thing is, it's not necessarily new technology. I have a friend, a university friend who did psychology. He worked in computer interaction, and he was working for the Ministry of Defense, building headsets for people jumping out of airplanes and storming buildings that would do exactly the same, this kind of, real-time augmented reality, telling them where to go in smoke-filled rooms, that sort of thing. So now we're seeing that transition into more applicable things for the real life. Who knows? Maybe I go full circle. Maybe archaeologists have headsets.
Oh man! Now wouldn't that be the cat's pajamas? If actually that's so this actually does transition to the next one, because for those of you who may be sitting here listening to our somewhat ridiculous but relevant conversation
We'll
about
get there. We'll get there.
archaeology
Yeah,
and
yeah,
software adoption. There is some confusion around, well, what do you mean digital adoption? And I love the analogy you made to augmented reality, but I am curious because I have no doubt when you interact with people that maybe don't know you and they say, well, what do you do for a living? And you're like, well, I'm the head of product for Userlane. And like, what's Userlane? And you explain it and you say it's a digital adoption platform. I have to imagine you still, in this day and age, it's not, like saying I work for Microsoft where people go, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of know what they do. How do you explain to people what digital adoption technology is?
It's a great question, because I mean, we ask ourselves the same question like literally every time we look at the vision and the strategy and say, what is a digital adoption platform? It is fairly nascent, right? This hasn't been around for 10 years. And the
No,
kind
it
of
hasn't.
technology, the moving parts, the bits that make this possible kind of have. And we've had you see little bits of this if you go back into the history and the annals of time of
very
software.
basic kind of inflow prompts
Exactly.
or things like that. Again, I know some of my folks in the digital adoption space hate being compared to Clippy, but I do think kind of the very early days of that's kind of what Clippy was. He was kind of like, how do I do a pivot table? And Clippy showed you what to do.
Exactly. What I think a lot of the ideas aren't new, right? The ideas definitely aren't new. And so basically what a digital adoption platform is, and what we like to think of it as Userlane, is our mission is to help anybody use any software instantly.
Okay.
And I think that's basically what we want. And if you turn that on its head and think, what is the goal of a CIO in a company? Well, they're always talking about digital transformation. We need to turn this process, this thing, which is a piece of paper goes from here to here and it turns into something, turn that into a digital process. And then the only way you can succeed if you do that is then by getting people to adopt that process. And so people implement things like CRM platforms and marketing automation systems, and they put software in their company all the time. The number of applications people are using is increasing massively. So dozens of applications, hundreds.
I just posted last week, Jane Hart did a thing, and there were, and I can tell you right now, people are using more than this, but she had like 100 L&D tools just for L&D, and it wasn't even like the big tech that we use. This was just tools that people are using. So I don't deny that one bit.
And that's probably just the ones they know of, right? What about all the little hidden apps, the ones that are kind of like secretly slid under the door and under the radar that people are implementing in their departments,
or that are so ingrained in your flow of work, you forget to even mention or think of it because you're like, oh yeah, I guess I use that every day, type of a thing.
Exactly. So there's this phrase I've heard a lot about, software is basically eating the world. There's software everywhere. There's an app every 5 minutes, all these sorts of things. And how do you make sure that people are using the right app at the right time, that they're doing the right thing? You've probably got one guy, Dave, in your company, and he does something really easily and quickly because he's been there ages. How do you make sure him doing that for 5 minutes and knowing exactly how to do it right is transposed onto all of your other employees who also should be doing that, and not struggling around? Because okay, let's think about the world we live in. You're at home, I'm at home, I'm mostly at home, and so is most of my team. That's the reality. We have this mixed sort of mode of working where people could be anywhere. And how many people just can't turn to the guy next to them and say, hey, how do you do this again? How do I book vacation? How much time do we lose in an organization because Dave wants to book vacation in a new application, he's never used it, and he wastes 20 minutes trying to find out how? And that's the problem. So with a digital
and the thing you brought up there that I think a lot of times gets missed with this conversation, and I think this is where we miss the real value statement with it. I mean, I think there's value to just how to use software. Okay. When you think about the inefficiency and time wasted going and asking 30 different people. And I mean, I can think of an example fairly recently where it was like, where's our holiday schedule? And that turned into a 3-hour exercise of like emailing people and being like, can you find, no, it's in this stuff. It was a nightmare. So there is that inefficiency of just where do you find stuff? How do you locate it, or how do you use it? But you really hit on the business process optimization. And that to me is one of these pieces that isn't often talked about enough in this space. Is we have these processes are now becoming digitized because they're done in systems. And it's, well, how are you ensuring that those processes are actually happening the way they need to happen to be effective, or even consistently, so you can tell, is this process the right process, or is it a broken process we need to fix?
Exactly. And there's two things there. One of them is that obviously the optimization of that process is probably why you bought the platform in the first place. Why did we buy a CRM tool? Because we wanted to basically get leads into a system and then get them out and turn them into opportunities and then deals quicker. Right. That's basically why we did all that. And then we wanted to manage it in a single.
Yeah, nobody was like, you know what we should do? Spend a boatload of money. I have no idea why, but let's like buy it, and who knows whether we use it or not. Maybe some people will like it. Like there was somebody somewhere was like, we need to optimize the way we do X.
That's how it was sold to them. That's how it was. Salesforce don't sell themselves, and Pipedrive don't sell themselves to people by saying, hey, it's just like you used to do, but slower, right? That's not what they say. And so people are going to hate it.
We reduce efficiency and slow things down. That's what we do with your processes.
And then the other problem is, the reason I don't think the optimization part gets spoken about enough. People talk about training and learning and helping people to, start using an application. The reason they don't talk about the optimization enough is because I think they're worried. They're worried about this whole theme about robots taking over, and you're going to start automating things. And hey, if now suddenly you're going to make my job shorter, what about me? And I think what our goal is, what makes me sleep at night, isn't that we might be replacing people. It's that we might be liberating people. We might be freeing people up from the mundane, soul-destroying stuff, allowing people to do people things that they do really well, and computers to do computer things. So we're not automating the process. You're teaching people through doing. And that
and I think that's a really important clarification, because you do hear fear kind of wreak havoc in some of this stuff, and in some ways that's one of the things that drives this tendency to not want to share and streamline processes, is because you've got Bill, who you mentioned before, who knows how to do this in 5 minutes and is like, well, I don't really want anybody knowing how to do this, because I know how to do this in 5 minutes. And if everybody can do that, then that's going to be a threat to me. Or what if they decide, wow, if that's all it takes you, why don't we just get a machine to do that, and we don't need you anymore? When if yes, your goal is to simply do the process for the rest of your life, which chances are I don't know many people who go, you know what I love doing? Mundane processes all day long.
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
Amazing. But I think there's that fear.
And therein lies the mission, the goal for a digital adoption platform, especially for us at Userlane, is, not all software is created equal, right? And I'm gonna call it out because in my past job, I don't think anyone's ever left a job because of a piece of software they use, right? But absolutely, pieces of software have made employee experiences worse. If you think that people don't use consumer software because of the experience they have, and they have no choice but to use that software inside an organization that they work for, then that's not going to make them happy, right? And so we used NetSuite in my last company, and you had to book holiday on it, do your timekeeping and everything. And it was the worst. It was terrible. It was so awful. And every single time you approached it, you were like, how did I do that again? I can't remember. And so having this kind of like this layer that this friendly, approachable part of your work, which is always the same across all your applications, which says, hey, book some holiday, do this. A little assistant that pops up. It might not be Clippy. I actually quite, Clippy's cool. I feel like he gets a bad rep, right? But bringing back this kind of friendly layer to the applications you use at work that is just there and can soften those edges. I think that's the mission.
Well, and I'm sorry I keep like giggling here, and it's not because of our conversation. My wife texted me like in the middle of our conversation. She's like, "Did you literally say the cat's pajamas?"
Nice.
So anyway, that's why if you see me smiling, it's because I keep seeing it out of the corner of my eye and laughing. But the point you bring up on this is, you're right. People aren't necessarily going, and on their exit survey, they're not marking like, why did you leave? Because I hate our HR, our CRM.
NetSuite, yeah.
They're not going to mention that. But when you think about the fact that if day to day they're frustrated by the fact that, gosh, I'm spending all my time in these obnoxious things, they're making my day frustrating and irritating. And I think this is what we're seeing, where the conversation around employee experience is now rising to the surface, and people are going, Now, the problem I think we have is a lot of people are saying that, but when you say employee experience, what do you mean? That's all over the map. But I think that's what we're getting at is if you're miserable, which if 80% of your day is spent using different systems and softwares, it has a heavy weight on whether your employee experience sucks or is actually really good.
And that's, I mean, you mentioned employee experience having many dimensions, right? And it means different things to different people. That is a super important point because my previous role was at an employee experience management company. We also did customer experience management, so things like surveys, analytics, quite deep analytics to try to work out what actions you need to take to improve the employee experience. But fundamentally, it boils down to a survey, which is the annual engagement survey or the quarterly engagement survey or whatever you happen to be doing. And I think when you say employee experience now, to a lot of people, it's synonymous with engagement and that survey we did. And then people are like, okay, no, people are happy. Look, I did this survey and blah, 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 blah. But then you get back to, I think EY have this saying, which is the key to a good answer is to ask a good question, right? And the opposite is also true. If you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right kind of answers.
No. When you ask questions like how amazing is your employee experience?
Imagine how long the survey would be. Imagine how long the survey would be if you had to ask how they felt about every application they use.
Yes.
And yet experience is built over like moments of truth, right? And as an employee, when I did my employee experience survey, I wasn't thinking about XYZ, but then
you might have been pissed off at the system you were doing your employee experience survey and going like, part of the problem is this stupid survey you sent me that took me 2.5 hours because I couldn't figure it out.
I guarantee people have left because of employee experience surveys.
They have. But I think the other point, and I think this is one of the trends that you see in organizations where I can really relate to this back to my software days, is there is this idea of, well, to fix the employee experience, we need to buy new platforms. Like, the problem is everybody hates this platform. Let's go buy this new platform. And I remember in my software days, there were so many medical centers I worked at that they hated the platform until they realized like, oh, that's how you're supposed to use it. I guess this actually does work really well but that became a problem. And so sometimes, not to say you shouldn't ever evaluate new technologies, you absolutely should. However, this idea that the solution is always just around the corner by buying a new platform, a lot of times if you don't fix the problems that are actually existing, it's like, well, you're just going to end up with the same problems on a different system. And just fundamentally, it's impossible to change these huge enterprise platforms every single time people get frustrated with it. It's just not feasible.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think it's required either, because I think you can't. I remember when I came to join Userlane, one of my ex-colleagues warned me. He said, dude, you're going to join a company that's basically doing digital adoption, all that. You realize that your competitor is good user experience, right? So as soon as everyone nails good user experience, you're not going to be relevant anymore. And I'm like, that's not at all the point, right? So
the archaeologists will be digging up my bones and cleaning them off by the time I ever have to worry about that.
Exactly. I'm never going to worry about all of these software companies suddenly nailing it, right? That's not going to happen.
And I've heard that in IT conversations before. Oh no, this is going to be such an intuitive design that we're not going to need train. Well, I have seen more initiatives done around that than I can count, and it hasn't happened. And I just don't think we're ever going to get there because, again, that's such a personal, everybody's experience is so personal that to try and cater to it's not possible to design a system that's so flexible that everyone's experience can be so intuitive. It works perfectly for them. And no matter what, you still have that learning curve on the front end.
And it's not just about that. So I think the other dimensions, so what you've said is totally correct, but there are more dimensions to digital adoption platforms. So it's not just about making sure people can intuitively do something, but making sure people know what is the relevant thing they need to do now. Right. So it's the context and actually being able to push something to somebody and say, right, today, you guys need to make sure you did this and actually pushing people into a process, making sure they've been
when they need to
not having to go around like old-fashioned managers, like tapping on people's shoulders and, hey, did you do your timesheets? Hey, did you do your vacation? Have you put all these opportunities in properly? Did you make sure you entered all the phone numbers the right way around because we're changing the way that we use the outbound dialing system or whatever?
Yeah.
And so,
Well, the data validation piece, honestly, like human error is just something that you can't user experience your design your way out of. The fact that people make mistakes, they're going to input something wrong. And again, even going back to this business process, your business process determines how you use the system. You can't user experience design your way around it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because also you've got lots of different systems working together inside a company, and applications working across, your processes working across applications. And one example from very early in my career, we're talking probably going back to 2005 now, 2004, 2005. I worked for a company with a telecoms platform, and they integrated with a CRM system. CRM system was absolutely fine, nothing wrong with it. It had all the validation you'd expect on a phone number field, right? And so you could enter a valid phone number and not an invalid phone number. But they had an outbound dialer from us, which is the way you basically can click on the screen to call somebody.
Yep.
And that had a specific format that needed to be in. Now, the problem isn't on one platform or the other. It's the fact that both things have a different concept of what a good phone number looks like. And there needs to be some parsing in between. And so then you've got everyone going around saying, hey, guys, in the system, make sure you enter phone numbers this way, right? And that's a manual process. You're putting a manual process into a system that already has validation. So what the CRM system's concept isn't compatible with what the business process requires. And that's where a DAP can help as well. You can stick something on top of that says, hey, do it this way, and it has validation in it. Won't let you do it the wrong way. So
and not to mention specific. Like the whole like, well, what if once systems get to a point where the user experience is seamless, people won't need this. You also would then also have to assume, once businesses get to a point, they never have to change their process again because they figured out their process so perfectly. It's perfect the same and never change. It's never going to happen. It's not a reality. So again, I think your archaeology, we'll be long dead before we ever have to be concerned about that.
Exactly. I mean, archaeology, history, call it what you want, but we see the same problems and paradigms repeating themselves anyway, right? So I've now been in this long enough for the same stuff that we fixed 20 years ago to now be a problem again because no one knows.
Now it's new stuff. It's just called something else. Like, oh no.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit because I am curious. And this is actually a question that Boss brought up. And I think it's a good question, which we actually said we want to talk about this a little bit. And there's kind of a twofold thing. I've got a perspective on where it fits into kind of an L&D, but let's kind of first back up a little bit and talk about where are you seeing organizations fit this? Because there is, whenever I talk about system adoption, I've been in conversations where some learning leaders go, oh, we don't touch systems. Others are like, well, every once in a while we'll get pulled into an initiative. Now that's if you're on more of the HR side. You start talking to functional learning leaders, oftentimes they're deeply steeped. But I am curious, first of all, before we talk where it fits in L&D, where are people actually really maximizing digital adoption tech?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's changing, it's evolving. Like I said, I mean, digital adoption is not it's not an old space.
No, it's not.
Over the last few years, I mean, we're building it right now, right? So it is what we want it to be to an extent of what the market and consumers need it to be. If you were asking me this question 2 years ago, probably most customers you're looking at a business process owner owning the digital adoption platform, right?
That makes
so
sense.
You've got someone who's in sales or around sales, responsible for CRM, responsible for Salesforce or whatever they are, and they're like, okay, I need something on top of Salesforce, so I'm going to put Userlane on there. I'm going to build some guides. I'm going to put some tooltips in. I'm going to do some contextual learning and all this sort of stuff inside Salesforce.
Okay.
And then
sales enablement. I mean, I think that they were some of the biggest customers that I knew several years ago.
And then you see it across the suite, right? You see people saying, oh, that's cool what you guys are doing over there. We need that over here as well. And then you see, suddenly it's on the HCM platform. And then 5 minutes later, it's somewhere else. And so you see it sort of spreading, but it goes from business process owner to business process owner because their remit is to make this process work.
They're accountable to people actually being compliant to these processes.
And what we're seeing in a shift now, I mean, I did a breakfast roundtable in London a few months ago before the summer. It was amazing, actually, because it was the first in-person event I'd done since COVID, which was awesome. And actually seeing people face to face in London again was amazing. But it was mainly people, people leaders, so CHROs and stuff like that. And we did a report earlier this year. I got it in front of me. It's the State of Digital Adoption report, because we wanted to work out, okay, exactly this question: who owns these processes, and how does it go, and all this sort of stuff. And we tried to find out, and we couldn't, because no one had really done the study before. So we did the study.
Interesting.
And so we got all these people together to release this report, and everyone agreed around the table. So the people are saying, okay, this whole process of digital adoption and monitoring and stuff like that, it's to do with software. It must be owned by the CIO, right? And then the CIO or the tech people are looking at it thinking, well, it's employee experience. It's to do with adoption. It's to do with the application owners. It's to do with X, Y, Z. So they're looking at it's got to be to do with you. And then when you ask the same question to the CTOs, what they're saying is I'm doing digital transformation, but I've got nothing to measure that. So I don't actually have any single metric. I don't know where the digital transformation works. I'm just being told, make sure you digitally transform everything and put software in places to do stuff. So who owns it? It's shifting. It's shifting from being completely decentralized to having a centralized control or a centralized implementation, but then with the decentralized ownership of the individual business processes or applications and stuff like that. And that's what we're seeing.
Okay. Well, it's interesting, because I was always curious, because you're closer to it, since you're implementing all these. And again, I talk to a lot of orgs, and then I have a point of view on a lot of things. And it's very similar to what you're saying, where that is kind of where I saw it in the beginning. It was these little pockets would spike up, and then all of a sudden you had 50 of these little pockets all over. And then a lot of times what happened was the organization either all of a sudden went like, why do we have 57 contracts on this type of a thing? And usually it was a financial exercise, but then they struggled to kind of figure out, well, who does own this then, type of a thing. And I do see now, I almost see this as a strategic opportunity for L&D right now to say, we're in the business of performance and people development. Why not? Don't wait for the business to go, we don't know who owns this. Here, it's in your lap. To me, this is one of those areas where we can actually take a strategic position at the table and go, you're all trying to solve employee experience. You're trying to solve how to better use our systems. We're in the business of developing people and improving performance. Here's something we can come to. But I think your point of you can't try and run it all centrally, that'll get a little too crazy, because there's just no way to know all the nuances of the business 100%. Processes.
Exactly. And I think the CIO in an organization would like to see themselves as someone who can empower the organization in the same way that, the CHRO wants to empower employees to have access to all the things they need. And if you can provide this sort of tool to all of the people who need it, L&D would be one of them, then they can use it. But there's almost an existential question for L&D, I think, in terms of digital adoption. And that is, how much of L&D's time, like the actual, talking about what computers can do and what people can do well, how much of L&D's time should be spent teaching people how to do a particular business process in Salesforce, right? And that it's kind of soul destroying, right? Do you invest in people? Absolutely. We spend hours every single week teaching people how to put an opportunity into the CRM tool. And at the end of the day, that's something that a computer can do great, right? You nail that process. Userlane can actually help people, guide them through it, and make sure they're doing it properly, and you can track and monitor that. And then you can get L&D to focus on the really important thing, which is, like I said earlier, my job didn't even exist when I started out in tech, and neither did the kind of software that we do or the kind of problems that we're solving. What are the next challenges for your company? Where do people need to grow? Where are the real things they need to learn?
Well, and I think to Boss's question, and this is kind of the follow-on. So like, where does L&D's role sit in this? I think it's a little ubiquitous right now. It's like, well, it's a unique opportunity for us to kind of call the shots in that, because there isn't a clear definition of, IT owns this and L&D's. It is an opportunity for us to go, well, how do we think that fits? And then let's go to the table with what that looks like. Because where I've seen success with this is similar to what we talked about from more of a federated model, where L&D can almost set up the center of excellence around how do you think about this rightly And again, not to be the subject matter expert, but to say, how do you use these principles well? How do you use this technology well? Because I've seen it used extremely poorly in organizations where it's like, oh, great, we can jam crap in people's faces when they're here. Like, let's jam crap in front of people's. And it's like, no. That is the wrong way to use a digital adoption platform. And I think that's where, as L&D people, we understand the principles of this to say, how do you use this properly? What questions should you ask? How do you define where it makes sense and where it doesn't? And being in some ways almost that coach, and whether that's your design team specifically, or whether you have, kind of a technical team that really works with the systems, to me, that is where I've seen it extremely successful. Is let's figure out how to use this well. Let's be the enablement team of this technology. But then let's be the partners with the functional teams to say, you've got this business system, you've got this business process. Let us help you think about it, and then give you the keys a little bit and say, now you own it. You own it, and we're here to support you, and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the goals of an L&D team, right? And you might be using a learning management suite or something like that to create curricula or things that you're just going to give people to checkbox when they start working in a company or when they're going through a particular training course or something like that. And I think their goals might be quite different to a user's goals at that time. So it's this in the flow of work, which is important. So what we're seeing increasingly, we work with a lot of L&D teams, but also with a lot of just generally business process owners to say, okay, this is going to pop up when you need it, but it's going to check something off on your LMS, right? So if you're if you're going through if you're learning how something works, or you're going through a curriculum in your learning management system, and it says, okay, learn how sales works or how the system works, XYZ.
How to put a lead into your CRM.
Exactly. And then you just click, rather than going through a document or a video that someone filmed or something like that, you can also click and go straight into the tool and actually do it. And that's even better.
What a novel idea. Actually assess if somebody can do the thing versus whether they watched the thing that told them how to.
And it's to me, it's all about, so if you think about a company like Userlane, it's mostly around interactive guides, right? It's mostly around interactive content that you present on the screen. But that's the now or the past, more likely. And actually what it's evolving into is something way more holistic. So it's not just about interactive guides, it's about a bunch of other content you want to make available as well. So what we're also trying to do is cater for people who learn in different styles. I mean, L&D teams know this, and we know this from years of experience, that everybody learns in different ways. Some people learn by doing, some people love to watch videos. I mean, you look at the success of TikTok, right? And YouTube Shorts. People will sit for hours just watching short clips of things. And so you need to cater for all those different ways and styles of learning as well. And learning by doing, the interactiveness of it is an extremely important part of it, because you can track and measure it. But it's one of the tools in the arsenal.
Well, and I think that's, again, and this is where, when I've seen success with digital adoption, and then I want to get into the actually measuring this, because this is kind of where we're going with this, which I think will tie into this. But a lot of times this can feel overwhelming for orgs, and rightly so. They can kind of look at this and go, holy cow, like in lane guidance, and we can push things to people, and it almost becomes just analysis paralysis, where people freak out. And I think it's one of those things where, when I've seen success, it's, you don't have to start with everything. Start with some of your biggest pain points, ease those pain points, and then continue layering on top of it additional things, because over time, certain things you're going to realize, you know what, that really wasn't that big of an issue. We can take some of that stuff out. This is really a strategic opportunity to do this here. Let's layer that in. Or maybe this is only for a period of time because we're making a major change. But eventually that major change is just what we do. We don't need to spend as much time. And I think that when you start to break it down, it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, and you've touched on probably the biggest challenge for a company adopting this kind of technology is exactly that. And you can liken it to, I guess, imagine your car, right? The purpose of the dashboard in your car is to tell you what's wrong, right? What's right and also what's wrong. How fast am I going? What are my revs and blah, blah, blah. But there's a billion different alerts. In the old days, it would have been actual little bulbs, right? You'd have had and you'd have seen them when you turn the car on, you'd have seen all these lights that some of them turn off and some of them stay there. Nowadays, it's all, whatever the electronic display on your car is going to pop up a million things you've never seen before. And you go into the garage and you say, look, this is wrong with my car. It told me the tires are wrong, or this is wrong, or this is wrong. And then they'll plug a computer and it'll tell them exactly what's wrong. Now, imagine you had a car and it didn't have any of that. You just took it in and said, well, something's wrong because it's making a noise. Okay, let's strip the whole thing down and we'll get there eventually. It's going to take you a bunch of time. It's going to be super frustrating. You might not even fix it and you might make it worse. And if you think about a digital adoption platform, it's the same. What do you do first, right? What's the biggest pain that the user experiences? If I'm trying to fix digital adoption, if I'm trying to help people adopt this platform I've got here or adopt this process or whatever, then how do I know where to do that? Who do I target? What's the first job I should do? Not let's all sit in a room and think about the 20 things we want to build guides about or the 50 tooltips we want to add. And if you think about traditional learning and development, that's how they do it, right? So what we're spending most of our time on right now is analytics, right? It's actually what you can do with the digital adoption platform is really clever. That you can switch Userlane on, not create any content, and just watch and say, okay,
what people are doing.
I can see that people are struggling here. So it's understanding where people are struggling, and then having the toolbox and saying, okay, now in my toolbox, I can improve this by creating a guide. I can improve this by popping up an announcement to say, hey, remember to do your XYZ. I can improve stickiness in this application. I can make sure people adopt a process by looking at task completion. And then taking that one level up. So if you think about in your organization, how am I reporting? So I'm going to show you one screenshot of the tool here. Okay. So I'm just going to hope this works. But basically, so this shows the pulse of your applications across your organization. And we have a heart score in Userlane. And this heart score is basically 5 components to it. There's happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task completion. And we see that as holistic.
So you're actually putting metrics to health of an application versus just this vague, ethereal, people like it or they don't. Well, that doesn't really tell us anything about it.
Absolutely. And it encompasses all of the dimensions that we think are really important to make sure, if you were to ask me, has an application been adopted? Is Userlane being adopted? That's what we track, right? Okay, well, are people returning to this? Are the number of people in the organization who I expected to use this using this? Are the tasks that I thought were important in this application being completed? And you can start tracking all of these things. And then fundamentally, you add the H to that. Actually, how do people feel about this app by gathering in-app feedback through Userlane? Because that's an important dimension. It doesn't matter if they're doing all their tasks. If they hate it.
Yeah, if they hate it, if they're doing it, but they're absolutely miserable, that's a different story.
And it could be really fixable things, right? People might hate your application because every time they go in, they have to log in, right? That it could be as simple as that. I hate this app because I'm going to give you a low score because
I'm asked for my SSO or my single sign-on every single time, even if I've only been out of it for 5 minutes.
Exactly. So you give someone in an organization a super high level of, okay, I've got 20 apps, I've got 100 apps, I've got 1,000 apps, whatever it happens to be. And I've got actionable things now. And Userlane's telling me, okay, I can go in and for instance, fix that problem with signing in. Or I know that people aren't completing this task. Well, how do I push people to the right content to nudge them in the right way to make sure they're doing that? So this is kind of just trying to make sure that what Userlane's role is not just giving you the toolbox, right? Which is where we started. You start by giving people the toolbox.
And I love that you brought this up because, one of the things I wanted to talk about, which now we've naturally led to this, is kind of where this is going. Because again, these aren't new. Digital adoption's not new, but it is relatively new. I mean, I was playing around with it in 2015-ish, a little before then. And it was in its infancy kind of then. And I mean, they were clunky. They were heavy, weighty, type of a thing, but they worked. And now, but I think your point of they could do stuff, but it really was pretty heavy on you to then interpret, well, is this working? Is this not? I don't really know, type of a thing. So what you're showing there is really kind of the next generation, which I think this is now moving us. You hear in the industry a lot talk about analytics and insights. And a lot of what I see is more dashboards and information. And it's not necessarily telling you anything. It's up to you to kind of go, well, wow, that's a really neat chart. There's lots of things on it. that looks good or it doesn't look good. And it's very subjective in terms of, well, is it really telling me anything that I can do something about, versus we're gathering all these data points and serving it up into you in a way that says, yeah, here's what we're seeing. And based on that, here's what that means, so that you can start to go, oh, that's an interesting, maybe there's something we can do about that to try and move that score around.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, exactly right. There's one thing that I realized in my last company. Like I said, we were in experience management, and I realized no one in the world wakes up in the morning on a Monday after a weekend and says, you know what I really want to do? I want to build a survey. Right? That's the last thing people think, right? And the point of that little, anecdote is that people are time poor, right? They've got a billion things they're worried about. They've got a billion things to do. The last thing they need is to try to learn how to interpret your incredibly beautiful, but ultimately not very insightful dashboards and numbers and all this sort of stuff. And you can throw numbers at people as much as you want, but what you really have to throw at people is, what do you do now, right? So you need to give people something, say, and I mean, we've been talking about actionable insights so much, it's lost all meaning, right? I want actionable insights. Fantastic, have all the numbers. And it's like, well,
here's another dashboard that has a whole bunch of fancy graphs and charts on it.
Exactly. And if it doesn't tell you what you want, don't worry. You can export it to Excel and build whatever you want, like whatever. It's but if it doesn't tell me what to do, I don't have time to work out what to do. So what am I going to do? I'm either going to forget about it, shelve it, move on to the thing I can do something about, or I'm going to have to spend more money, get someone who understands these things. I'm going to have to get a consultant in. I'm going to have to dig deeper, all these sorts of things, or make time. So everything is just cost and time. And so our job, actually, one of the bit of our ethos at Userlane is we want to fight for simplicity and help users win and help the customer win. So it's that thing that says, if you've got a digital adoption platform, no one woke up in the morning saying, the one thing I want to build right now is a guide, or the one thing I want to do is see how well adopted this is. They might have that question in their mind, but they've got a billion other things to do. So I need to make this super simple for them.
Well, and I think, and I have a follow-up question to this, but I think where organizations start, we've talked about a lot of different ways that there are entry points to this that can feel less overwhelming. Even like you said, just turn it on and start to gather feedback and data on how are people using the system. Because I think that is one of the challenges that I am excited about what technology can do for us now. Is a lot of these things that were a black box, where it was like, this isn't working. And you're like, why? Well, I really have zero idea. And really the only options that we had were like, well, you could go do focus groups and surveys, and you could do all this, and then you'd get it, and you're like, well, that's not really actually exactly telling us, or this is like a very small percent. And now it's at a point where we can go, well, actually, no, we can concretely tell you, here's what's happening. That's a pretty easy entry point. I mean, I even think in some orgs I've been with, you have ticketing centers a lot of times, and that's also another really easy. I mean, you can ask your analytics people, what are the top 30 tickets that you get? And you're like, oh, how much time do you spend responding to this? Click these 5 steps. Well, we get 700 tickets of these a week, and we spend probably X number of hours, which becomes very easy to quantify. So there are some easy ways to jump into it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is that there's a combination. It's when you start to combine this qualitative and quantitative world. That's the really clever part. And it's something that people have been talking about for absolutely years. Oh, I want to get more into qual and quant and start blending these two things together and understand what the terminator is between them. What does it mean to us? Because you can't really just make decisions based on quant data, right? That would be awful.
No, that would be a terrible decision.
You go back.
That's what happens when you turn AI on and just let AI make decisions.
Exactly. You get racist Twitter. And I think the problem is that if you just look at the volume of the data available to you and make decisions based on that, you need to decide with data, and you need to combine what people feel and what people think with also the facts, the things that you can't escape. How many people do this? What are they doing when? And those sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, and I think the point that, we brought this up earlier, and also before I say this, I think back to before we went live, some of the conversation we had where we were laughing a little bit about some of these arguments that people get into right now, where it's like you're arguing two sides, and it's like, you're arguing over the wrong thing. And I think of that same thing with measurement. Well, is quantitative data the right data, or is qualitative? And it's like, yes, like it's just yes, it's both. We need both of these things.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And I couldn't come from a company that dealt with employee experience management and surveys and stuff and say that asking people didn't matter, right? That's actually why when I joined Userlane, it was like, okay, we've got to add the H, right? We have to look at what people think, but we have to do it in a way that makes sense. And I think what we need to bring to users so that they can do their jobs easily is bring them a framework and say, it's not about a billion numbers. It's not about X, Y, Z. In order to tell you what to do next, you have to look at something that fits inside a framework. Say, what does good look like? And how can I then improve that with this toolbox? And that's I think, the purpose of a digital adoption platform. That's the P, right? If it doesn't do that, then it's not a DAP. It's just a digital adoption tool, I guess. How do you take it from a tool into a platform? A DAP.
like we need another acronym in the mix.
Exactly. We don't need any more acronyms. They all mean a million things.
But here's something, because I've seen one of the risks I've seen with these, because I think they have tremendous potential. I really do. And the thing you brought up earlier about, to me, I see them as the AR of systems. And I'm excited for where AR is going, because it's like, well, wouldn't it be great if you could just have this kind of guidance in real life? Which it's not wouldn't it be great, because you can. I've done it, for years. It's not new either. But I am curious, sometimes the danger of these things where there's so much potential, right? We talked about the complexity of all these things, and you could do this and you could do that, and all these analytics coming in, and you can have all this visibility into stuff. Sometimes that can almost set things up to fail, because all of a sudden people's expectations are, this is the solution to our software problems. This is the solution to all of our broken business processes. If we have a DAP, bam, digital transformation, we will go from 85% failure to 99% success. And that's dangerous territory to get into. So kind of a twofold question is, what are some of those things that you caution people where you go, yeah, careful? And what are some of those common pitfalls?
Yeah, that's a great question that was kind of all encompassing as well. So, I mean, you're exactly right? Software, an application or a platform can't solve every problem that you have. And what we try to focus on is, what is the job to be done, right? What is the thing? What is the next thing that this person is trying to do that's really important? And then you prioritize and you try to say, okay, this is what digital adoption platform is for us. We have to take that back to our main goal, which is, we want to help any user to get help as quickly as possible, and it has to be relevant, and it has to be as easy as possible as well. And that's really what the mission is. We want to be easy, relevant, fast, and in everywhere where the user is. And that gives us our mission. We're not going to solve every single problem in the world. And there are actually applications that do amazing jobs at, mining all of the applications for all of the usage data and license usage and stuff like that. And we can touch on that, and that's great. And we can certainly see ourselves moving in that direction. But it's we're never going to solve everybody's problem. You need to have a great implementation team and a center of excellence. And I think that's important. You mentioned center of excellence before, and I think it often gets, people often use the phrase, we need a center of excellence for this. And then that's just a phrase they say one day. And they said that in Q1. And then in Q4, they're like, so how's the center of excellence going? Well, Dave's very busy. And, there you go. You need to invest in a center of excellence, right? And so Userlane has an amazing professional services team, basically, or implementation team. That's a more accurate way of phrasing it. It's not a professional services team. It's an implementation team that helps customers to ride that first wave, right? To try to adopt and say, okay, these are the problems Userlane's really good at solving, and this is where you should apply this application. And then we have implementation partners and stuff like that who can help with it. But fundamentally, a customer needs to understand, what is Userlane going to help me do? Where does that overlap with LMS? Where does it not overlap with LMS? How does it fit within the ecosystem?
I can see that one too. People thinking, because you see this with systems too, where they're like, oh, it can do that. Can it replace our LMS? And you're like, I mean, like, well, but for some people, maybe in some situations.
Right. Yeah. for some people it genuinely could, and I think maybe there are situations where, because you can do all the same things, right? You can have an assistant, you can have cohorts, you can do segmentation for users and location and all this stuff, and I can create a curriculum of things that you can run through. Ultimately, learning is about having something that is personalized to a user and encompasses a lot more than just what you see on your screen inside that application. But I think you even touched on it earlier, like we spoke about it with augmented reality. We have a 2026, and we're going to go further vision, like a 5-10 year vision of what we want, what we think the DAP space will be and what we think Userlane will be. And hell, if in 5 years time someone's not wearing an AR headset and learning something, then something's wrong, right? Microsoft are already doing this, so yeah.
Okay, well, and I'm really interested to see if the DAP, as you play in this space, I think you are well positioned to start to blur those lines outside of just systems, because you already built the infrastructure of, well, what are people doing and what kind of insights and how do we help guide them through all that? And you've navigated this. And to me, it is a natural next step. The one thing that you hit on a little bit that I just want to add to another one to kind of like push to people on this, because I've seen this where it's like, we're going to use this to improve our business processes, kind of like we're going to use AI to improve and it's like, what is the process? And it's just kind of met with like, ooh, I guess we were kind of hoping this would help define it for us. And it's like, whoa, you do need to make sure that you've thought through and there's still some things we've talked about that you can do outside of that. But really that business process piece, I've worked with a number of orgs where we've had to really sit down and go, not that you wait for that, but to say, we're going to have to do the hard work of actually defining what do we want good to look like? Because if we don't have that, I mean, what are we going to guide people to if we haven't defined what that process really is?
Yeah, exactly. And I think also in the future, if we think about like the goal of wanting to help users do everything, business processes don't exist inside one application. When Userlane first started up, we were inside web applications, right? So we're inside web applications. And the next goal is, okay, well, let's escape from web apps. And I give Userlane like a personality, right? So imagine Clippy, imagine the Userlane avatar on your screen. It escapes from the browser environment. Suddenly it lives on your desktop. And that's where we are right now. So we can work on any desktop app. In the future, it needs to escape from there into the real world,
to where are people
in some terrifying, I don't know, maybe lawnmower man type environment. I don't know. Anyway, we'll go there later. But that would be horrific. But in any case, it's escaping from its boundaries to help users where they are, where they need help.
Yes.
Right? But business processes don't exist within single applications. They never have.
No, they don't.
Right? So
no.
And so the ability of Userlane, any DAP platform, really
floating off,
to be able to cover multiple applications and actually follow a process and follow a user through as they're doing something is really the important part. It's not just, hey, can you help people book vacation inside their HCM? Yes, but actually what would be super cool is if you understand the full end-to-end process, can we follow the user from the beginning to the end, and can we be there and make sure they do it right and everything is correct
versus just one small snippet of it.
Exactly. And some of that's aspirational, some of that's real world already. So
yeah. Well, I think, and I think I had a conversation last week, and we were talking about the fact that the tech's ahead of the science. So I think the capabilities for a lot of this is there, and I think what we hit on from the very beginning is there's a lot of opportunity to define this still and say, well, what do we want it to be? Because it could be a lot of things. So I told you we were going to run out of time. I'm just getting started, and we're out of time.
We could keep going.
But with that, I really enjoyed this conversation. And again, really digging into, not only just the analytics of like what is happening, but like, what does that mean? And how do we actually start to quantify, not quantitative, but just quantify, like, what do we actually mean with this? And it's a mix of that. So I'm glad we were able to have this conversation. Thank you for making the time, Luke. I really enjoyed it. For those of you watching, hopefully this has made you think a little bit differently about this. And again, hopefully we're not going lawnmower man, but there's a bright future, I think, ahead in terms of how we can actually start to guide and support. We keep talking about learning in the flow of work. here's a legitimate opportunity to actually do that. And I think it's something that every L&D leader should at least be keenly aware of. So thanks for your time, Luke.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Christopher. It was a pleasure.
All right. Have a good one, everybody. And we will see you next week.